Welcome to The Explainer. We're about to jump into a wild period of history, a time when the world map was literally being redrawn by these huge, powerful states.
So what does it take to build an empire? Well, between about 1450 and 1750, the answer to that question got a major update, and it was all thanks to one, let's say, explosive invention that put a ton of power right into the hands of some very ambitious rulers.
And this is the era that gave us what historians now call the gunpowder empires. I mean, the name says it all, right? These were states whose entire game plan, their expansion, their very existence was built on using firearms to conquer new lands and, just as importantly, to control them.
So, who were these empires, really? And how in the world did they use this new technology to get so big, so fast? Okay, so the key players, you've got them stretching all the way from the Mediterranean to the Pacific. A few major powers really popped up, and they were all using gunpowder to get ahead. We're talking about the big Islamic empires, the Ottomans, the Safavids, the Mughals, but also China's Ming and Qing dynasties, a Russia that was just exploding eastward, and of course the new monarchies in Europe that were busy centralizing their power. The one thing they all shared, big ambitions and a brand new tool to make it happen. Let's just take the Ottoman Empire for a second. Their rise was, wow, just spectacular. In 1453, you have Mehmed the Conqueror showing up with these massive cannons. We're talking some that were like 26 feet long, and he uses them to just blast through the walls of Constantinople, walls that had stood for 1,000 years. And just like that, the Byzantine Empire is gone, and the Ottomans have a new capital, Istanbul, which becomes the heart of a dynasty that's going to last for 600 years. Talk about a statement.
And then you have Russia. Their expansion eastward was just relentless, and it was all fueled by gunpowder. Ivan the Terrible, yeah, that guy, used his armies with firearms to basically conquer the old Mongol territories. This was huge because it let him lock down super important trade routes like the Volga River. And that one move, it opened up direct trade with Persia and the Ottomans. The whole balance of power in the region just shifted.
Okay, let's dive into this. I mean, conquering all that land is one thing, but how in the world did these rulers actually control it all once they had it? That's the real trick, isn't it?
Yeah, they all basically had the same big problem. How do you centralize your power when you're ruling over these huge, diverse groups of people? And, maybe more importantly, how do you handle the powerful nobles who are always looking for a chance to challenge you? Turns out, it all came down to controlling three things: the taxes, the army, and religion.
And what's so fascinating is how these different empires, thousands of miles apart, came up with kind of the same playbook for keeping their nobles in check. It's like, keep your friends close and your rivals closer. In France, the nobles had to live at the ridiculously over-the-top Palace of Versailles. In Russia, Ivan the Terrible made the powerful nobles, the boyars, move to Moscow where he could watch them. And get this, in Japan, the local lords, the daimyo, had to follow this alternate attendance policy where they lived in the capital every other year. Oh, and they had to leave their families behind as, insurance. Pretty clever, huh?
The Ottomans, though, they had this really unique and pretty brutal system called the Devshirme. The whole point was to create a bureaucracy and an army that was loyal to one person and one person only, the Sultan. Here's how it worked. They would forcibly recruit Christian boys from the lands they conquered, convert them to Islam, and give them an elite education. Some became top administrators or tax collectors, but the absolute best of the best, they became the Janissaries, the Sultan's personal elite troops. Think about it. These guys had no family ties, no old loyalties. Their entire life and career depended on the Sultan. That's how you build a loyal force.
And this wasn't just an Ottoman thing. All over the world, rulers were creating these new classes of bureaucrats to basically be their arms and legs out in the provinces. In Mughal India, they were called zamindars, local guys who collected taxes for the emperor. And in France, the king had his intendants, sometimes called tax farmers, who went out and did the exact same thing. It was all about making sure the king's power reached every single corner of the kingdom.
Okay, so you've got the army, you've got the tax collectors, but is that enough? Nope. Rulers also had to convince everyone that they deserved to be in charge. They needed to legitimize their power.
In Europe, one of the most powerful tools for this was the divine right of kings. And the logic is kind of genius in a terrifying way. The idea is that the monarch was chosen by God to rule. So if you oppose the king, you're not just committing treason, you're opposing God himself. It basically makes rebellion a sin. How do you argue with that?
And how do you show off that you've got God on your side? Well, you build stuff. Big stuff. Rulers started using these massive, grandiose architectural projects as a power statement.
Take the Palace of Versailles in France. Louis XIV's palace wasn't just a place to live. It was basically a stage, a theater of power. It was designed to completely blow the minds of anyone who saw it, to awe them into submission with just how huge and rich it was.
Same idea over in Russia. Peter the Great builds the Winter Palace in his brand new capital, St. Petersburg. He wanted to send a message to the rest of Europe. Hey, look at us, we're a major power now. It was all about projecting that imperial might.
And of course, in Mughal India, you have the Taj Mahal. Now, we all know it's a magnificent tomb that Shah Jahan built for his wife, but it was also so much more than that. It became this incredible, lasting symbol of the empire's power, its wealth, its artistry. At the end of the day, all these buildings, Versailles, the Winter Palace, the Taj Mahal, they were all screaming the same thing. We are powerful, we have the right to be here, and we're not going anywhere.
But here's a twist. Just as rulers are using religion to back up their power, religion itself was becoming a huge source of conflict, especially in Europe, right? The Protestant Reformation just completely shatters the unity of the Christian world. You get Martin Luther in 1517, King Henry VIII doing his own thing. It leads to more than 100 years of incredibly brutal religious wars. And the big takeaway from all that chaos? The central authority of the church got weaker. And you know who filled that power vacuum? The kings. They ended up with even more control over their own states.
Okay, so this is the big question. These empires seem unstoppable. They've got centralized power, incredible architecture. Even God is supposedly on their side. So why did they all eventually start to weaken?
Well, there's rarely just one reason, right? It was usually a mix of things. You had problems on the inside. Corruption was a big one. And you had peasant revolts because of super high taxes, like the White Lotus Rebellion in China. But the really critical thing was a failure to adapt. The world was changing around them, and they couldn't keep up. And here's the irony. The very things that made them so strong, like those big centralized bureaucracies, ended up making them too slow and rigid to deal with new challenges, especially the huge threat coming from Europe's growing sea power.
And really, that's the heart of the matter. You've got European countries in Russia constantly upgrading, modernizing their militaries and their ships. Meanwhile, many of these other great land empires, they kind of became victims of their own success. They just kept doing what had always worked for them, but the world had moved on. The methods that made them powerful in the first place were suddenly becoming obsolete.
All right, so after this whirlwind tour through 300 years of empire building, what's the big takeaway here?
Well, for one thing, these empires literally drew the map. A lot of the political and cultural boundaries we see on a globe today were forged back then. They absolutely mastered the game of centralizing power over huge areas. And just as importantly, their eventual decline is what set the stage for the next big chapter in world history, the rise of sea-based colonial empires.
It's really this timeless pattern, right? Empires rise and fall, and they always use the best tools of their time to do it. Which leaves us with a really interesting question to chew on. If gunpowder was the game-changing technology that built the empires of that age, what are the tools of empire today?